that.
Well, I'm a pot stirrer, so I'm going to try not to avoid it, especially considering there is a topic that merges what we're talking about with trademarks and copyright, right, and AI with Copilot.
I knew
So
you were going to go there.
I am
Yep.
curious because you happen to be one of our favorite lawyers. You know,
Yeah, I was going to say I'm not a lawyer anymore, but can you stop being one? I don't know.
I don't think you can.
Yeah, I'm
No,
not.
you're just a
You're
lawyer
just
now.
branded that the whole time. It's cool. So curious your take on taking let's say open source code and using AI to write new code or take snippets.
No, I don't know yet. I'm working it through. I don't understand all the nuance well enough. In all honesty,
That's fair. It's really complicated. And
yeah.
I mean, do you think that, like, to kind of ask a related but still interesting question with this, do you think that the tools that are generating code, whether it's legal, moral, whatever, are fundamentally different than the tools, the stable diffusions or these kinds of things that are
Right.
generating art or natural language or these other things?
Yeah.
Is there something different about generating code?
I'm not sure that there is. And even, if you think about a developer using tools as they're generating it day to day, is there a difference? How much human control do you have to have? Who makes that decision? And I think it also gets into this realm where I already mentioned that, you need it cross-border, but you need all of the AI stuff to be really joined up. And I don't know what the answers are. I honestly, it's something mad, and I'm not just avoiding this up. You know that I have an opinion on everything, right? I don't on this because I spent 5 years doing the book. I've not had a holiday this year because I've been editing this. I was about to say stupid book. It's not a stupid book. Cut that. It's excellent text, but it's been a lot, and it's meant that I haven't had the time that I would normally dedicate to really thinking about it.
Well, let me take a thought experiment outside of the AI realm. Okay. And I am legitimately curious about this. We all have access to immense amount of source code, right?
Yeah.
And so we all know that if you take a library, a package, and you include it, there are certain, things that you have to do that follow the license of whatever your copy.
Yeah.
However, what about code snippets, parts of the code? Because from a outside the AI perspective, we all have probably seen something that we like, and whether consciously or subconsciously say like, "Oh, I love how they did that. Let me copy that."
Yeah.
Where does it become?
Where do you define all these things? So what's a snippet? How much? So I work on the basis that when I first got into open source, there was something written, and I won't say on whose site, but one of the foundations had something that was wrong legally on their site about how many lines of code you had to have before copyright applied. And it was just wrong. And I used to get into these arguments with developers. I generally worked on the basis, I learned everything that I knew about open source from the Ubuntu guys and the people I met around that. And the people from there had been in the Debian environment. And, they really taught me a lot. And I was super respectful of their legal understanding because they knew a lot more about the nuance of open source than I did. And it took me a long time to catch up. And some of them still know more about licensing than I ever will or want to. But you have a level where, you can take a very small amount without the copyright applying to it. The problem is defining what that is not a rule. You can't create a rule the way the law works. So I work on the basis that you're best to default to absolutely everything having copyright in it.
Okay.
It's just it's a safe, you can spend a lot of time arguing about it legally, which is the only people who will win are the lawyers. They'll get paid. So personally, I think you just work on defaults that make it easier. So just assume there's copyright.
Because
That's so
That's not the answer you
counterintuitive
want
to
to
me
that. You
because
want
I
to
feel
buy
like there's, I feel like what that implies is just that you could you could theoretically have copyright over like mathematical functions or like things that
and then
are...
what you have to remember is what is copyright. And again, I'm being a boring ex-lawyer here, but copyright is not about an idea. The idea would be expressed in a patent, and that's how you protect it. It's about the actual lines of code, so it's about the actual iteration. So you have to lift and shift. If you just see something and then you go and write your own version of it, that's fine. I mean, that might get into if you've got contractual obligations around, non-disclosure and confidentiality, or with your employment contract or something, you might get into problems. But if you've seen something and you go and create your own version of it, that's not a copyright breach. It's actually this. It has to be identical to be copyright.
Well, right, but if you pick like really basic things, you're like, I'm gonna copyright a function that checks if a number is even. There's like not many ways to do that, but like most people would be violating copyright when they implement that in their code at some point.
And then you get this whole line of argument.
You get in these really weird places very quickly, and I feel like someone who, just like how do you keep open source safe from like patent trolls, basically?
Well, you're just jumping around
without naming any names,
right? So you and you get copyright trolls, but you're sort of jumping slightly there because the idea of copyright is that you've created something that has a value in it, that it's not just that basic. So that's part of the problem, and it's part of the reason that I wonder whether copyright should ever have been applied. But we get back to my nirvana and reality. So I think that you have to work on the basis that anything has the copyright, and you just apply that across the board. Now, how that's going to work with my which will have to be after February, after our conference, but my exploration of AI, I don't know. If you speak to me in 6 months, I might have a different view.
Well, we'll have to do a round two, have you on the podcast again sometime. Then.
And just to clarify for those who are listening, when we're talking about copyright and we're talking about OSI licenses, okay? I just want to clarify. The OSI licenses aren't necessarily just copyright, right? So
no, that's true. No, absolutely. So some licenses, so we require a license to share, right? If something has copyright in it, anybody beyond the creator of it or whoever owns that copyright cannot use it without a right, and that right is what the license is. So you give them a shot of it, you let them borrow it by giving them a license, and they can use it so long as they comply with the terms of that license, and that's copyright. Whereas patents are about an idea, and some open source licenses also include patents. Not all, but some do. And then trademarks are expressly excluded from others. And those three are three kinds of intellectual property. You get into things in Europe like database rights, and in the US like trade dress as well. But those aren't really dealt with. But the copyright and the patents are dealt with, and trademarks are specifically excluded, which means if you're an open source project, one of the things that you ought to be advised to do is to register trademarks. And this is a fundamental problem for the OSI. So Bruce Perrins, who sadly has been ill recently, but who was over in the UK a few months ago, he and I spoke at an event, I would say together, but we both spoke at the same event. And then sitting in the pub afterwards, he was telling us about trademarks and why the OSI doesn't have a trademark. And he said that they were advised not to register one. And if that is right, that was a bad piece of advice. Because what a trademark is your brand of origin, your certification to prove something comes from where it is supposed to have. And Bruce was told, he says, not to have registered open source, which is why it's a problem. And by the time we went to register it, it was too late, because once something's in common parlance, you can't, it becomes descriptive, and you can't register a descriptive word as a trademark. So had that advice not been given, it'd be really clear and simple. And we could be saying there's an absolute here that, you have to have an OSI license for it to be open source. But personally, I don't think an error in legal advice like that should stop us understanding what the fundamentals of open source are. So for me, an OSI approved license is what's required for open source software, and it will potentially include more than copyright, as you say, Matt.